Imagine a child sitting quietly in the corner of a dimly lit room. Their eyes wander, searching for something, anything, that feels safe. Their small hands are folded tightly as though holding themselves together, because no one else will. And though their face looks calm, inside their little heart is trembling. That child could be anyone, and maybe once upon a time it was you. What Carl Jung discovered, and what very few people dare to talk about, is that the empath, the one who feels everything so deeply, is often not born out of pure light, but out of pain. Behind their compassion lies a hidden wound, and that is Jung's darkest truth. The empath is often just the child who learned love through suffering. When Jung explored the human psyche, he was not looking to flatter or to romanticize. He was digging into the shadows, into the places most of us spend a lifetime trying to avoid. He understood that every quality we see in ourselves, the strength, the kindness, the sharp sensitivity, was shaped by the forces of our earliest experiences. Empathy, in this sense, was no gift randomly bestowed by the universe. It was survival. Imagine a child in a home where anger erupts like sudden storms. 1 minute, silence. The next, shouting. The child doesn't know when it will come, but they learn quickly. If I can sense the shift before it happens, maybe I can protect myself. Maybe I can soothe, calm, anticipate, make myself invisible, or just lovable enough to escape the worst of it. And so, empathy becomes armor, but the armor looks like a soft heart. That is the paradox Jung pointed to. What we admire as extraordinary sensitivity may, in truth, be the result of extraordinary pain. Think about how this shapes a person's life. The empath walks into a room and immediately notices the smallest flicker of discomfort on someone's face. They can tell when a friend is hiding sadness behind a smile. They feel the mood shift when a stranger says nothing at all. People often say, "You're so caring, so understanding, so gifted." But the empath knows it doesn't always feel like a gift. It feels heavy. It feels like carrying the weight of everyone else's emotions on your own fragile shoulders. And yet, they keep carrying it, because that is how they learned love. If they could keep others happy, maybe they would be safe. Maybe they would be loved in return. Jung's truth unsettles, because it forces us to confront the origins of our goodness. We like to believe empathy comes from some pure source, that people are kind because they are simply born that way. But he asks us to look deeper. What if your kindness is your scar? What if your generosity is the bruise that never healed? To acknowledge this is not to diminish the beauty of empathy, but to finally understand its cost. Picture the little girl who grows up with a mother whose affection depends on perfect obedience. One wrong word, one small mistake, and the love is withdrawn. Cold silence fills the room, and the child feels abandoned. What does she do? She learns to read her mother's moods, to predict them with uncanny accuracy. She becomes a little detective of emotions, always one step ahead, always bending herself to keep the fragile connection alive. Years later, that same girl grows into a woman praised for her compassion and emotional intelligence. But inside, the old wound whispers, "If I don't keep everyone happy, I will be left alone." And so empathy, though beautiful, is chained to fear. This is where Jung's idea of the shadow becomes so vital. He warned us that everything in us has two sides, the light and the dark, the gift and the wound. The empath's shadow is this. Their ability to love others deeply often comes at the expense of loving themselves. They give, and they give, and they give, until their own heart is empty. Why? Because deep down, they still believe love is something you earn through sacrifice, not something you deserve simply for existing. And yet, here is where the story takes a powerful turn, because Jung never left us in despair. He believed that by bringing what is unconscious into the light, we can transform it. To know the true origin of your empathy is to begin to reclaim your power. You are no longer just the child who learned love through pain. You are the adult who can choose to heal it. So let me ask you, have you ever wondered why you feel so responsible for the emotions of everyone around you? Have you noticed how quickly you pick up on tension? How hard it is for you to rest when someone you love is unhappy? Have you asked yourself why you always find yourself in relationships where you give far more than you receive? That is the echo of your childhood training. That is Jung's truth playing out in your life. But here is the deeper question. What will you do with it now? You see, awareness is only the first step. The empath who knows their pain has two choices. They can keep repeating the old pattern, carrying everyone's weight until they collapse, or they can take the risk of turning that compassion inward toward themselves. Imagine what would happen if the child inside you finally heard, "You don't have to earn love anymore. You already deserve it." That moment is where healing begins. In Jung's view, to integrate the shadow is to embrace the parts of ourselves we've been running from. For the empath, this means facing the uncomfortable truth that their sensitivity was born in pain. It means grieving the childhood they never had, the childhood where love was safe, steady, unconditional. It means allowing anger to surface, the anger they were never allowed to feel when they were small and helpless. And yes, it means letting go of the identity of being the rescuer, the healer, the caretaker for everyone else. Because as noble as it looks, it is not freedom. True freedom comes when you can love others without abandoning yourself. Now, let me tell you a story to make this clearer. There was once a man who always seemed to be the shoulder everyone cried on. Friends would call him at midnight. Lovers would lean on him during their storms. Coworkers would confide their secrets. He wore this role proudly. The strong one, the good one, the kind one. But behind closed doors, he felt drained, invisible, and resentful. He wondered why no one ever noticed his pain, why no one held him the way he held them. Then one day in therapy, he broke down. He saw himself as a little boy again, sitting alone in his room while his parents fought in the next. He remembered how he used to tiptoe around the house, carefully choosing his words so he wouldn't make things worse. And in that moment he realized, I became the good one because I had no other choice. My empathy was born out of fear. That realization shattered him, but it also set him free. For the first time, he understood why he lived the way he did. And from that day on, he began the hard work of setting boundaries, of saying no, of choosing himself. His empathy didn't disappear. It became stronger. But now it was no longer chained to his wound. It was finally a gift, not a burden. This, Jung would say, is the path of individuation, the journey of becoming whole. To embrace both the light and the shadow. To look at the child you once were and say, yes, you suffered, but you also survived. And now, you can live differently. That is the redemption of the empath. To no longer be defined by the pain that shaped them, but to transform that pain into wisdom. And perhaps this is why Jung's darkest truth is also his most liberating. When we stop pretending empathy is just a gift and admit it is also a scar, we gain the power to heal. We see ourselves clearly, maybe for the first time. And from there, love can finally flow, not out of fear, not out of obligation, but out of freedom. Pause for a moment and let that sink in, because chances are, if you are still watching this video, this truth is not just about empaths in general. It's about you. If you're still here, still listening, that means something inside you has recognized the truth. You know, the story of the empath isn't just some abstract psychological idea. It's real. It's lived. It's yours. Maybe not in every detail, but in the echoes that shape your life. Jung believed that once the unconscious is made conscious, it demands our attention. And right now, you may be feeling that pull, the voice that whispers, "This is about me." Think back to your own childhood for a moment. not just the memories you tell others, but the ones that sit quietly in the corners of your heart. Did you grow up feeling safe, or were you always just a little bit on edge? Did you know, without doubt, that love would be there no matter what? Or did you learn that love had conditions, that you had to be good, to be quiet, to be strong, to be perfect? Every time you bent yourself to meet those conditions, you weren't just surviving the moment. You were laying the foundation for the person you would one day become. And maybe that person is the empath, kind, intuitive, endlessly giving, but also tired, sometimes resentful, and secretly afraid of being left behind. Jung would call this the complex, the web of unconscious patterns that silently shape our lives. And the empath's complex is this: if I take care of everyone else, maybe someone will finally take care of me. But here's the tragedy: that moment rarely comes, because the world sees the empath as giving is endless, and it forgets they need something too. And so the cycle repeats. The empath gives more, hoping to finally feel full. Instead, they feel emptier than ever. Now let's pause here. I want you to notice the paradox. On one hand, empathy makes life richer. It allows you to connect deeply with people, to sense their needs, to love in ways most can't. But on the other hand, when empathy is born from pain, it can also trap you. You become the one who knows everyone else, but who is rarely known yourself. You listen, but your own voice goes unheard. You give, but your own hands are left empty. That's the shadow side, the part we prefer not to admit, because it's easier to tell the story of being gifted than to admit we are wounded. Let me share with you another story. A woman named Sarah spent her life as the caretaker of her family. As a little girl, she had an alcoholic father. She learned quickly how to manage his moods, how to comfort her siblings when things got bad, how to keep the household together when it should have been falling apart. As an adult, everyone described her as the strong one, the rock, the heart of the family. And in many ways, she was. But behind her smile, she carried exhaustion. In private, she sometimes wept, asking herself, "When is it my turn? Who will hold me?" Jung would have recognized this immediately. He would have seen the child inside her, the child who had once been forced to grow up too quickly. That child had turned into the empathic adult, but the wound never left. It simply put on new clothes. Why does this matter? Because until you see the wound for what it is, you can never truly heal. You will keep replaying the same roles in your relationships, hoping this time it will be different, and wondering why it never is. Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Think about that. How many times have you told yourself, "I just attract selfish people," or "I just have bad luck in love," or "I'm just the one people come to for help"? What if it's not fate? What if it's the unconscious pattern repeating itself, waiting for you to notice? And here's where the suspense builds. Because the empath who finally wakes up faces a terrifying question. If I am not defined by my ability to carry everyone's pain, then who am I? For many, the identity of being the healer, the caretaker, the good one, is so deeply ingrained that letting go of it feels like death. But it's not death, it's rebirth. It's the beginning of becoming whole. Imagine for a moment what life would feel like if you no longer carried the weight of everyone's emotions. If you could walk into a room, sense the tension, and instead of absorbing it, you let it pass. If you could love someone without needing to save them. If you could give without emptying yourself. Doesn't that sound like freedom? Jung would call this integration. The moment when you stop being ruled by the shadow and begin to live from wholeness. But integration doesn't come easily. It comes with pain, with grief, with the uncomfortable process of revisiting your past. It requires sitting with the child inside you who learned love through pain and finally saying the words no one else ever said. "I'm sorry. You deserved better. You are worthy of love without conditions." That moment is not quick, and it's not simple, but it is life-changing. Because once you give that child what they were missing, the adult in you no longer needs to keep playing the same role. This is where music swells in the background, where the story shifts from sorrow to hope. Because you see, the empath's story doesn't have to end in exhaustion and emptiness. It can end in transformation. It can end in becoming not just someone who feels others, but someone who also feels themselves. Someone who doesn't just survive love through pain, but finally learns love through freedom. Let's return to Jung. He believed the soul longs for balance. That is why the shadow exists, not as a curse, but as a guide. The shadow reveals the places where we are incomplete. For the empath, the shadow says, yes, you love others, but do you love yourself? Yes, you feel their pain, but do you feel your own? Yes, you carry them, but who carries you? These questions are not accusations. They are invitations. Invitations to step into a fuller version of yourself. The danger, though, is real, because some empaths, instead of integrating, fall deeper into their wound. They become martyrs, defining their entire identity around sacrifice. They wear their exhaustion like a badge of honor. They confuse being drained with being good. Jung would call this identification with the complex, when you become so fused with your old pattern that you cannot see beyond it. That is why awareness is so important. Once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. And once you see it, you have a choice. Here is the turning point. Will you keep loving through pain, or will you learn to love through freedom? That is the central tension of this story, and it is the choice every empath must face. Now, let's slow down for a moment. I want you to imagine yourself in two different futures. In the first, you never wake up. You keep giving endlessly, always putting yourself last, always absorbing everyone's emotions, always being the strong one, the good one. Years pass, and your body grows weary. Your soul feels heavy. You look back and realize you lived for everyone else, but rarely for yourself. That is one path. But in the second future, you wake up, you see your wound for what it is, and you choose to heal. You begin setting boundaries. You start saying no. You stop apologizing for needing rest, for needing care, for needing love that is mutual. At first, it feels terrifying. Some people may leave. Some may be angry. But slowly, you notice something else. You are lighter. You are freer. You are no longer just the child who learned love through pain. You are the adult who has learned love through truth. And in that future, your empathy doesn't disappear. It deepens. But now, it comes from abundance, not from fear. That is the path of integration, the path of wholeness. Which future do you want? That is the question this story leaves in your hands. Because here is Jung's gift to us. He didn't just expose the darkness. He showed us how to transform it. He believed that every shadow carries the seed of light. The empath's wound is not a life sentence. It is a doorway into deeper self-knowledge, into healing, into love that is no longer chained to fear. So the next time someone praises your empathy, remember this. Yes, it is beautiful, but it also has a story that began in pain. And you are the author now. You get to decide how it ends. Pause here. Breathe. Feel the weight of that truth. Because this is not just psychology, it is your life. And what you do with this knowledge will shape every relationship you ever have, including the one with yourself. Now that we've stepped into the heart of Jung's darkest truth, let's go deeper. Because this is not just about recognizing the wound. It's about living with it, facing it, and eventually transforming it. The empath's journey, when told honestly, is not a straight line from pain to peace. It's messy. It's full of false starts, relapses, moments of clarity followed by moments of collapse. And that is why it's so human, so real. Think about it this way. The child who learned love through pain doesn't just disappear. because you're grown now. That child lives inside you. They show up when you feel rejected, when someone raises their voice, when someone ignores your needs. Suddenly, you are not the adult anymore. You are the child again, small and scared, doing everything possible to keep love from slipping away. Jung understood this through what he called the inner child, though he spoke of it more in terms of archetypes and complexes. But the essence is the same. Until that child is acknowledged and healed, it will keep running the show. And so the empath often finds themselves in relationships that mirror their past. Have you noticed this? The woman who had a distant father often ends up with distant partners. The man who had to soothe his angry mother finds himself with a partner who is often enraged. The empath, unconsciously, is drawn to people they can rescue, people who need them, people who replicate the same dynamic they had in childhood. Why? Because the psyche is always trying to resolve unfinished business. Jung said the unconscious doesn't forget. It repeats. It repeats until we finally face it, until we learn the lesson it is trying to teach. But here's the catch. Repeating the wound is not the same as healing it. You cannot rescue your parents by rescuing your partner. You cannot fix your childhood by fixing someone else's pain. You cannot earn the love you missed by giving more of yourself away. Healing only begins when you turn the empathy inward, when you allow yourself to feel your own pain fully, without running from it, without trying to cover it with the endless task of caring for others. This is the part many people resist, because feeling your own pain is terrifying. For years, maybe decades, you've been running from it. You've been distracting yourself with other people's emotions, with being the strong one, the good one, the fixer. To stop and feel your own wound feels unbearable. But here is Jung's wisdom. What you resist persists. The wound doesn't vanish because you ignore it. It waits, patiently, quietly, until you are ready to face it. And when you do, something extraordinary happens. When you finally sit with that inner child and allow yourself to grieve the love you never had, to feel the anger you were never allowed to express, to mourn the safety that was stolen from you, you discover a new kind of freedom. The pain is real, but so is the release. You realize you don't have to carry it alone anymore. You realize you don't have to keep proving your worth by being everything for everyone. You realize, perhaps for the first time, that you are already enough. Imagine a scene. A grown woman sits quietly in her room, tears streaming down her face. She remembers herself at 6 years old, sitting in the dark, waiting for her parents to calm down, waiting for someone to notice her fear. In her mind, she reaches out to that little girl. She kneels down, looks her in the eye, and says, "I see you. I love you. You don't have to earn it anymore." At that moment, something inside her shifts. The years of holding, of carrying, of being strong. Suddenly, they begin to soften. For the first time, she feels the weight lifting. That is the power of integration. That is the gift Jung pointed toward, hidden within the darkest truth. But make no mistake, this is not easy. It requires courage. It requires the willingness to disappoint others, to set boundaries, to say no. And for the empath, saying no feels like betrayal. It feels selfish. It feels wrong. But in reality, it is the first act of real love. Because love without boundaries is not love. It is self-erasure. And Jung knew that the path to wholeness always passes through the valley of authenticity. You cannot become whole while betraying yourself. This is where the empath faces their greatest test. Will they continue to live in the pattern, giving until they are empty? Or will they take the terrifying leap of honoring themselves, even if it means losing people who only valued them for their giving? That is the crucible, the place of transformation. And here's the irony. The very thing the empath fears, that people will leave if they stop giving endlessly, often becomes the greatest gift. Because when those who only took finally walk away, space opens. And into that space can come people who truly see you, who love you not for what you provide, but for who you are. The empath, for the first time, discovers what it feels like to be loved unconditionally. But it only happens when they take the risk of no longer buying love through sacrifice. Let me take you deeper into Jung's philosophy here. He believed that the journey of individuation, the path to becoming whole, is not about becoming perfect or endlessly good. It is about becoming real. And being real means embracing both the light and the shadow, the gift and the wound, the strength and the weakness. The empath's individuation is not about becoming less sensitive. It's about owning the truth of where that sensitivity came from and using it consciously, instead of being unconsciously ruled by it. Think of it like this. Before integration, empathy is like a reflex. You walk into a room, and you absorb everyone's emotions automatically, without choice. After integration, empathy becomes a skill, something you can choose to use or not. You can sense someone's pain without drowning in it. You can care without carrying. You can love without losing yourself. That is the difference between being ruled by the wound and being free from it. This is why Jung's darkest truth is also his most hopeful. Because once you understand that empathy is not just a gift, but also a scar, you stop idealizing it. You start owning it. And ownership is power. Ownership allows you to transform it into something greater. Now, let's bring this home with another story. There was a man named David, known by everyone as the nicest guy they had ever met. He would do anything for anyone. Help a neighbor move, listen to a coworker's troubles, sacrifice his weekend to help a friend. But secretly he was exhausted. He felt invisible, unseen, unloved for who he really was. Then, one day, he stumbled upon Jung's work. He read the line, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parents," and something inside him cracked open. He realized he had been carrying not just his own pain, but his parents' pain too. He had turned into the empath because he had no other choice as a child. But now, as an adult, he did have a choice. Slowly, he began to practice saying no. At first, it felt unbearable. He worried people would leave him. Some did, but others stayed. And those who stayed were different. They loved him for his presence, not his service. And for the first time in his life, David felt free. This is the possibility waiting for every empath, to turn the wound into wisdom, to stop living as the child who learned love through pain, and to start living as the adult who chooses love through freedom. So let me ask you, as you sit here listening, where in your life are you still carrying the old pattern? Where are you still giving out of fear rather than love? Where are you betraying yourself in the name of keeping others happy? And more importantly, are you ready to stop? Because this is where the real story begins. This is where the empath stops being just a survivor and starts becoming a creator of their own life, their own boundaries, their own joy. This is where empathy stops being a burden and becomes a true gift, one that is offered freely, without the chains of fear. Jung would tell you, the shadow is not your enemy. It is your teacher, and if you are brave enough to learn from it, it will lead you to wholeness. As we move deeper into this truth, it's time to address something that often lingers beneath the surface of every empath's heart: anger. Yes, anger. The very emotion most empaths avoid, suppress, or deny. After all, from childhood they were taught, sometimes brutally, that anger was dangerous. To show it might mean punishment, abandonment, or rejection. So instead, they swallowed it. They turned it inward. They buried it beneath layers of kindness, smiles, and endless giving. But Jung would insist, what you push into the shadow does not disappear. It waits. And often, that hidden anger seeps out in subtle ways: resentment, exhaustion, passive silence, or even illness. Why is this so important? because until the empath faces their anger, they cannot be whole. Anger is not evil. It is a signal, a boundary alarm, the body's way of saying, something is wrong. I deserve better. Without anger, boundaries collapse. And without boundaries, the empath becomes a vessel for everyone else's pain. So part of this journey, as painful as it is, involves reclaiming anger, not as destruction, but as protection. Imagine the child who was never allowed to cry out, finally screaming, "No more!" That cry is not cruelty, it is liberation. Here's the paradox. When the empath finally learns to feel their anger, they also learn to feel their joy. Because emotions are not separate compartments. If you numb one, you numb them all. By rejecting anger, many empaths unknowingly mute their own aliveness. They become caretakers, yes, but they lose their spontaneity, their passion, their sense of play. Jung saw this clearly. The psyche seeks wholeness, not partial survival. To reclaim the buried anger is to reclaim the fullness of life. Consider the story of Lena, a gentle, soft-spoken woman who never raised her voice. She was adored for her kindness, but inside, she carried decades of suppressed rage. As a child, she had endured constant criticism, every mistake magnified by her perfectionist parents. To survive, she became the good one, always agreeable, always quiet. But in therapy one day, the dam broke. She pounded the cushions, shouted, let the tears and fury flow. And afterward, she felt lighter than she had in years. Not hateful, not bitter, but alive. For the first time, she realized her anger wasn't her enemy, it was her truth. From then on, her empathy remained, but it was balanced. She could say no, she could speak her needs, she could live, not just survive. That is the transformation Jung envisioned. Not the destruction of the empath, but their liberation. To move from being a child who learned love through pain to an adult who learns love through authenticity. But there's another shadow the empath must face. The illusion of control. Think about it. Why does the empath feel compelled to monitor everyone's moods, to keep the peace, to smooth the edges of conflict? Because deep down they still believe, if I can control their emotions, I will finally be safe. This belief was formed in childhood, when safety truly did depend on anticipating a parent's rage or withdrawal. But in adulthood, it becomes a cage. You cannot control others. You cannot guarantee their happiness. And trying to do so only drains your life force. Jung would call this projection, placing your own fear onto others, trying to manage them to soothe yourself. But projection can be withdrawn. You can recognize, this is not my responsibility. Their emotions are theirs. My responsibility is mine. It sounds simple, but for the empath, it is revolutionary. To finally stop carrying what was never theirs to carry. This shift often comes with grief, because when the empath stops controlling, some relationships fall apart. Friends who only valued the endless giving fade away. Partners who relied on being rescued may grow angry and leave. Families who depended on the caretaker may resist the change. This loss is real, and it hurts. But it also clears space for something new. Relationships built on equality, mutual care, and genuine love. And here lies the ultimate irony. The empath, who once believed love was conditional, finally begins to taste unconditional love, but only when they stop earning it, only when they risk letting go of those who cannot offer it. Jung would call this individuation, the moment you stand as yourself, no longer defined by the expectations of others, no longer chained to the past. Now imagine a future version of yourself. You walk into a room, and yes, you sense the emotions swirling around, but instead of absorbing them, you observe. You remain centered, grounded, whole. You smile not because you must, but because you want to. You give not because you fear losing love, but because you overflow with it. And when someone tries to pull you back into the old role, you calmly say, "No, not with guilt, not with fear, but with clarity." That is the moment you know you are free. Let's tie this back to Jung's darkest truth. He did not expose the empath's wound to shame them. He exposed it to awaken them, to remind us that light and shadow are forever entwined. Empathy is beautiful, yes, but it often carries a story of survival. And when you face that story, when you grieve it, when you reclaim it, empathy is no longer a wound in disguise. It becomes a true gift. But let's be clear, healing is not about erasing the past. The child who learned love through pain will always be part of you. Healing is about giving that child what they never had: safety, compassion, unconditional love. It's about holding their hand as you walk into adulthood, whispering, "We are safe now. We can rest." That inner dialogue, repeated again and again, reshapes the nervous system, rewires the mind, and restores the soul. Music swells here, soft, hopeful, because this is the light at the end of the shadow. The empath's journey, at its core, is a spiritual one. It is the path of turning wounds into wisdom, survival into freedom, pain into purpose. And perhaps that is why empaths are so needed in the world, because once they heal, they embody a kind of love that is rare, a love that is not born of fear, but of choice, a love that doesn't drain, but uplifts. And so, if you are listening, if you recognize yourself in these words, know this: your empathy is not your curse. It is not your burden. It is your story. And stories can be rewritten. You are not doomed to remain the child who learned love through pain. You are free to become the adult who chooses love through truth. This is Jung's invitation, not to deny the shadow, not to bury it, but to embrace it, to look it in the eye and say, "I see you, and I choose to live." As we near the end of this journey, take a breath, feel the weight you've been carrying, and imagine, just for a moment, what it would feel like to finally set it down, to walk into your life lighter, freer, whole. That is not a fantasy. It is a choice. And it begins the moment you decide you no longer need to earn love through pain. So let this truth sink in. The empath is not broken. They are not weak. They are not doomed. They are survivors. And survivors, when they awaken, become healers. Not because they carry everyone else, but because they show others what it looks like to live free. And maybe that is why you found this message today, because something in you is ready to stop surviving, ready to start living, ready to turn empathy into freedom. Pause here. Let the silence carry the weight of that choice, because this is not just the end of a story. It is the beginning of yours. And so, when Jung spoke of the empath as the child who learned love through pain, he was not dismissing empathy. He was not reducing it to weakness. He was warning us, with the sharpness of truth, that empathy without self-awareness can become a trap. Because when pain teaches you love, it also wires you to expect that love must always come at a cost. You grow suspicious of joy, hesitant with peace, and almost addicted to fixing what is broken. This is why so many empaths find themselves drawn to partners who hurt them, friends who take advantage of them, or workplaces that drain them. Somewhere in the subconscious, the empath believes, if I can heal them, then I am worthy. If I can endure, then I am loved. That script was written long ago, when they were too small to know they deserved better. Jung often wrote about the necessity of individuation, the process of becoming whole. For the empath, individuation means turning inward, confronting the ghost of the wounded child, and saying with authority, I am not defined by the pain I endured. I am not bound to love only those who hurt me. My empathy is not just survival. It can be a gift, but it must first be a gift to myself. Imagine, for a moment, a woman who always puts others first. Her phone is never silent. because she's the friend everyone calls in crisis. She listens for hours, gives advice, lends money she doesn't really have, and smiles through exhaustion. To everyone else, she is an angel. But inside, she is crumbling. She thinks she's needed, but she's really being used. She believes she is loved, but she is really being drained. This, Jung would say, is the archetype of the wounded healer, someone who heals others while bleeding themselves dry. And here's the truth that often shatters empaths when they finally face it. Not everyone deserves their empathy. Empathy is a sacred energy, not an endless resource. If given recklessly, it fuels abusers, manipulators, and narcissists. The very people who first taught the empath to confuse love with pain are often the ones waiting at the edges of their adult lives, ready to repeat the cycle. That is why boundaries are not walls, but medicine. To the empath, setting a boundary feels like betrayal. It feels selfish. It feels cold. But in reality, it is the first act of true love they offer themselves. Jung knew this. He once wrote that wholeness is not about perfection, but about embracing every part of yourself, even the parts you deny. For the empath, wholeness comes when they admit, I have needs too. My love is not infinite. I deserve reciprocity. Now picture a man sitting in silence. After years of being the strong one, he has carried his family, supported friends, worked himself into exhaustion, and still, deep down, feels invisible. One night, he finally says aloud to himself, I cannot do this anymore. I deserve to be cared for too. In that moment, he is not weak. He is awakening. He is rewriting the contract life once forced upon him. And this is the shift Jung wanted us to see. Empathy born of pain can become empathy rooted in strength. It is no longer about pleasing others to avoid abandonment, but about connecting deeply without losing yourself. It is no longer about saving everyone else, but about honoring your own soul first. Only then can empathy shine as it was meant to, a bridge, not a chain. But here's the haunting question that lingers in every empath's heart. If love came through pain, will love without pain even feel real? The truth is, at first, it won't. Peace will feel suspicious. Kindness will feel undeserved. Silence will feel empty. But with time, with healing, the nervous system learns again. The child who learned love through pain slowly teaches the adult. Love can also be gentle. Love can also be safe. Love can also be mine. Jung's darkest truth was not meant to leave us in despair. It was meant to point us toward responsibility, to remind us that empathy, when unconscious, can enslave us, but when conscious, it can liberate not only us, but those around us. The empath who heals themselves becomes a beacon, showing others that pain does not have to define destiny. And so the question shifts from, why am I this way, to what will I do with this gift? Because empathy, sharpened by survival, can become the very tool that transforms not just one life, but many. And now, as we stand at the edge of this truth, let's pause. Let's breathe. Because if you've listened this far, chances are you recognize pieces of yourself in Jung's words. Maybe you are that child who once thought love had to be earned with silence, sacrifice, or suffering. Maybe you've grown into the empath who gives and gives, hoping one day the world will give back. Or maybe you've begun to sense the truth, that the cycle can end with you. Jung believed that the shadow, the hidden parts of ourselves, was never meant to be denied. It was meant to be integrated. For the empath, that shadow is the child within who still remembers the first sting of neglect, the first wound of rejection, the first time they mistook pain for proof of love. Ignoring that child keeps the cycle alive, but facing them, embracing them, changes everything. Imagine kneeling beside that younger version of yourself, their eyes still wet with tears, their small body tense with fear, their heart aching with the need to be loved. What would you say to them? Would you scold them for being weak? Or would you whisper, "It was never your fault. You were always enough. You don't have to suffer to be loved"? That is the moment empathy finally turns inward, healing its own roots. When that happens, something shifts. You stop chasing the love that hurts. You stop confusing sacrifice with worth. You stop believing that boundaries are cruel. Instead, you begin to see yourself as deserving of the very compassion you so freely give away. You learn to love yourself without condition, and only then do you invite relationships that reflect that same truth back to you. And this, perhaps, is the greatest paradox of Jung's darkest truth, that the empath's pain, once acknowledged and healed, becomes their power. The very sensitivity that once made them a target becomes their compass. The very openness that once drained them becomes their gift. And the very love that once wounded them becomes the force that finally sets them free. But make no mistake, the journey is not easy. It requires courage to turn away from familiar suffering. It requires patience to retrain the heart. And it requires faith to believe that real love does not demand your destruction. Yet every empath who chooses this path writes a new story, not only for themselves, but for generations after them. So if you are listening now, let this be your reminder. Empathy is beautiful, but it must begin with you. The love you give away so freely must be the love you learn to give yourself first. Because when you do, the world doesn't lose an empath. It gains a healer who is whole, strong, and unshakable. That is Jung's truth, both dark and liberating. The empath may have been born from pain, but they are not bound to it. They can rise beyond it, carrying their sensitivity not as a wound, but as wisdom. And so I leave you with this. Look within, face the child who still lingers, and offer them the love they always deserved. Then, watch how your world changes. If this message touched something deep in you, if it made you reflect on your own journey or someone you love, then share it. Leave a comment with your thoughts, because your story may be the mirror someone else needs. And if you want more insights like this, more truths that cut to the core and help you see yourself clearly, then subscribe and stay with us. Because this journey into the depths of the human soul is far from over. Until next time, take care of your heart, protect your empathy, and never forget, you deserve a love that does not hurt.